Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, by my math, it's college football week 15, the final dance of the regular season before we effectively get to Championship Saturday, a week from this coming Saturday.
I appreciate you doing the math and coming to the conclusion that it's week 15 and formally announcing it as such. However, my understanding is we had a slight hiccup on your end in terms of preparing for this podcast. You started down a path that didn't lead to victory, is what I understand.
No, there will be no hail to the victors on this particular podcast, as that game has been shut down. So to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit for our listeners, we kind of go back and forth early on in the week, ultimately deciding on what games we feel are the most intriguing from a national implication standpoint to an overall betting intrigue, what have you. And Michigan-Ohio State, despite what was going to be a massive point spread, was one of the games that made our short list. So like a dumbass that I am, decided that was going to be the first game that I broke down, knowing full well there was a good chance that Michigan, given some of the COVID outbreaks in their program, was not going to be able to field the team for this weekend. So you poke around, you read the practice reports on Monday. They said they resumed football activities. I'm going, you know what? People tell me I'm negative all the time. I'm going to be glass half full guy, and I'm going to start with a clash of the Titans in the Big Ten because everyone on Twitter called me out, said there's no way that Michigan won't play Ohio State this season. Lo and behold, Payne, I do all my research, I break the game down, and on the outline that I sent to you, we have a full page of notes that'll go absolutely nowhere because that game's not getting played this weekend.
Talk about efficiency. That's the Anthony Lynn model offensively right there.
It might be the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets offensive efficiency model that we had to endure last Saturday as our loyal listeners had to suffer through that as our best bet.
Not fun. Not fun. It would be nice if... kicked a field goal before half or maybe scored from the 1 yard line.
Yeah, I mean, going inside the 25-yard line with 3 trips, coming away with 6 points, not exactly the most efficient when you expect the Yellow Jackets offensive unit to be the strength of their football team, not the defense holding NC State to 3 points in the second half. But that's kind of been...
I have to tell you, I felt pretty good. Seeing the total go to 62, which is a key number. And the favorite only scoring 23. You think you're going to do okay there, but not the way this season's going.
No, that has been the level of frustration. I think that's been apparently evident not just for ourselves, but a lot of our colleagues throughout the space when it comes to college football, trying to figure out exactly what's going on week to week. But that's never stopped us before. We put our nose to the grindstone and we continue to persevere. But the reason I think it's important to bring up that Michigan-Ohio State game, despite us not having anything to cover, it obviously puts Ohio State's big picture vision very much in peril, given the ridiculous rules that the Big Ten decided to impose on themselves, that a team had to play a minimum amount of games to be eligible for the conference championship. Now, all things being equal, if Indiana was undefeated and Ohio State was undefeated, they weren't able to play each other, I can understand how you defer to a team that's played more games. But the reality of it is, in the Big Ten East, Ohio State went out there, they beat Indiana, they did it in pedestrian fashion as a 3-touchdown favorite. Why are we even trying to debate there should be another team playing for the Big Ten championship above the Ohio State Buckeyes?
I have no idea. What's that debate?
I mean, there shouldn't be one. In reality, there shouldn't be one. And everyone who's out there saying, oh, well, they didn't meet the criteria. It's a self-imposed criteria from the league that didn't have to be there. And the reality of it is, in a regular season, if you played your full conference game allotment, Indiana would have had to root for Ohio State to not lose just one game, but two because they lost the head-to-head tiebreaker. We've been on the Indiana bandwagon. We're huge fans of what Tom Allen has accomplished, but they should not be given a free pass to the conference championship if it means the Big Ten is ultimately potentially on the outside looking in the college football playoff. But let's be honest here, even if Ohio State doesn't play Northwestern in the conference championship, the Buckeyes are getting into the postseason if they win whoever they ultimately play next Saturday.
I think the big question mark and debate here is, when did these rules suddenly get implemented?
Before the season. So I will say the Big Ten's been consistent in their stance that
their rule change was before the season, that they didn't need to complete 6 games?
No. The rule was that they had to complete 6 games of their 8-game schedule in the pandemic season, knowing that some of this was going to be inevitable to qualify for Big Ten championship game participation.
So where's the 6th game? Is the 6th game apparently now going to be the championship game?
Well, no, that's the whole thing. So you're not going to get the 6th game. So Ohio State theoretically
That's what I'm saying. So they've navigated, they've skirted the rules a little bit.
Well,
and listen, we can debate what's fair, what's not fair. I don't really care.
No, I don't.
But at the end of the day,
end of the day,
this is a financial thing.
Oh, 100%.
This is a financial thing.
And fairness in college football doesn't actually exist. Let's not.
And it's the only chance
it.
they have of getting into the college football playoff.
Do you think, in your opinion, that the college football playoff that's imposed no minimum number of games would say, no, we can't take Ohio State because they didn't play in the conference championship? I don't actually think that happens. I still think they take an undefeated Ohio State team over a one-loss A&M team, where it gets a little bit squirrely, and I think the dynamic changes if Florida were to beat Alabama in the SEC title.
Right. Ohio State is rooting for Alabama here by all intents and purposes. That's the game. Win, have Alabama win, and you're in. That's the reality of the situation. Now, you would know better than me. I think still from a TV perspective, the ratings will be through the roof, but there aren't going to be a ton of fans at these games. So, like, packing a full house here isn't going to be a thing with ticket sales. But you do get that national recognition with Ohio State and certainly a viewership. So, at the end of the day, this is a financial thing. But you're also, I guess, wondering what other team could potentially be there. And Florida can earn their way in.
Correct.
Although that looks possibly a little more bleaker since we discussed this last time, because I think everyone that we had spoken with had that Alabama-Florida game in the range of 11 to 13 points. And I saw this week, John made an adjustment to their line over at FanDuel, and he's now using a look-ahead line of Alabama minus 14.5 against the Florida Gators. And there was also another pretty drastic move you saw.
Yep, there was a drastic move, and whether it came in the wake of our extensive Heisman discussion that felt like pulling teeth to get you to talk about, some of those things out there, which, to your credit, I think you acquitted yourself quite nicely. Despite going, I'm not a Heisman guy, I don't really want to discuss it. Mac Jones has moved into the pole position to receive a little bit of hardware at the Downtown Athletic Club in early January, jumping over Kyle Trask. Mac Jones right now a $1.35 favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Kyle Trask plus $1.10. So hopefully, Payne, our loyal listeners who respect your input and expertise, were able to grab a little bit of Mac Jones there, knowing that it should correlate heavily to Alabama as nearly a 2-touchdown favorite in that SEC championship a week from this coming Saturday.
I don't even think this would be a debate or close if Saban actually let him play a full game, or maybe didn't vulture his touchdowns and hand him to Najee Harris. That would be nice, because that's really the only distinguishing factor that Kyle Trask has, is that Dan Mullen's willing to let him throw touchdowns from inside the 5 pretty frequently.
It definitely works in your favor when you play inferior defenses in the SEC East and your coach decides to let you throw rather than trying to run it behind a offensive line that hasn't exactly paved the way to a dynamic Florida ground game. But I think anyone who watched as well, when you look at that Alabama receiving core, that if Nick decided he was going to let Mac throw from start to finish, he could have probably thrown for 8 to 9 touchdowns against the Tigers.
Very easy. Very easy. That was ugly.
So LSU, how the mighty have fallen. A 1 year removed from the honeymoon with Joe Burrow and Joe Brady. Ed Orgeron might be looking for work at the tail end of next season if LSU doesn't get back to some semblance of competitive balance. And knowing all the players that are opting out, probably not the best reflection of where the Bayou Bengals are headed. But the reason...
There you go. There's some caught wind of some issues internally going on there.
Well, I think
just
there's...
also there's been some noise this week that... possibly one of the highest tight end recruits of all time is going to transfer out.
Yeah, it doesn't look good when you lose one of your studs. What is it, Eric? I'm trying to think. I don't have the name in front of me, and I'm terrible with some of this stuff. But I did see that report come through, that when you lose a high-profile recruit of that nature, it's never a
Eric Gilbert.
A ringing endorsement for where the program is headed. But we give you all of that, and I want to ask you this question, Payne, because we've seen on social media that there's growing buzz that somehow, some way, Ohio State this weekend should schedule Texas A&M as a de facto playing game. And we came at this, from a variety of opinions. We talked about it briefly, made some jokes. That if you're Ohio State, what do you have to gain from that particular game? And knowing Jimbo Fisher and kind of his thought process, would there even be a scenario where Texas A&M would consider something like this? We say it tongue-in-cheek because we know it's not going to happen, but it's still fun, and I think part of what college football is all about is throwing out hypotheticals that are never going to come to fruition.
That's the wormhole that people go down when you see BYU suddenly going out there and scheduling a game, and it turns out from a viewership standpoint that it was fantastic. But from a program standpoint, BYU agrees to this game on a Thursday, they travel on a Friday, and they show up on a Saturday, and it's clear that there wasn't really a game plan.
Well, I'm not sure BYU even showed up on Saturday. That may be a little bit generous for anybody who watched the 60 Minutes down there in Conway.
You're kind of proving my point here is that these major programs aren't going to schedule a game like this on a whim.
Yep.
Especially when, if you're Ohio State, you've basically been given every gift in the world to make the college football playoff. Why would you ever play A&M? You can only hurt your chances.
Yeah, there's zero to gain if you're the Buckeyes. There's zero to gain unless the College Football Playoff Committee comes out and says, Ohio State, you have to play 6 games. We don't care who they're against for you to be considered. There is zero to gain for the Scarlet and Gray.
No. I mean, again, they haven't beaten a ranked opponent this season and will make their way into the college football playoff if Florida loses. If you're A&M, there's certainly more from an outside standpoint of giving yourself a chance to make the college football playoff, because I think at that point, if you win, if you're in, if you beat Ohio State, you're probably in. I know a lot of people said, hey, if Florida beats Alabama, you're in. But all of a sudden, you have a top-notch win against Ohio State, and you have the head-to-head against Florida. It's a much tougher case to make because you have pretty much equal wins there, and then you have the head-to-head. So A&M could certainly improve their chances, but that's not really Jimbo's vibe, I don't think. That just, to me, wouldn't make much sense. That's my idea of things. Now, Jimbo had gotten under some heat there from some of the boosters and the oil money, and then he goes out and beats Florida and picks up a couple wins, and now you're on the outside looking in. You're right there at the 5 seed, and suddenly this season in Jimbo moving forward, there's a lot of belief in that A&M program again, and they're going to continue to recruit because that's what Jimbo does. So I think he feels back to being pretty comfortable at this point in the game after, some people clamoring for his job about a month ago.
Oh, I think there's got to be a lot of optimism, and I think some of that obviously rides the coattails of LSU's premature demise, that suddenly we trying to figure out where A&M fit in the pecking order in the SEC West. All of a sudden, A&M becomes the second most prolific program, at least going forward, behind only Alabama, and who knows how long Nick Saban's going to continue coaching for, that maybe A&M can be that team that makes the next step, because I'm not sure, while Mississippi State and Ole Miss are interesting theoretically with their head coaches, and I think Lane Kiffin will continue to get the Rebels to perform at a high level as he brings in elite offensive talent, but you talk to people on the plains and those that watch games at Jordan-Hare every Saturday, they're not buying into Gus Malzahn as a program builder and suddenly Auburn being a perennial power in the West. I think A&M has staying power for the reason you mentioned. The oil money, despite the way that oil futures and everything else have taken a hit, and the energy sector throughout 2020, they're going to be just fine, and the paychecks are going to keep coming through because it's way too expensive to buy out Jimbo. You may as well bring in some players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are set up with everything you outlined. Also feels like Gus Malzahn is perennially fighting for his job. So another guy that's potentially on the hot seat, and if you lose a game this weekend, that will be interesting to see the direction that Auburn potentially heads this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, we feel, like you said, every year that Gus is will he retain his job? Will he not? And then Auburn has to try and figure out what other potential head coach you're going to bring in. I feel like Auburn in the SEC with Gus has become the exact same program that Texas is in the Big 12 with Tom Herman. Will they retain him? What, will they look to do? Urban Meyer, of course, appears to have spurned that particular job. You're firing Tom Herman and you're taking a $15 million hit. I hope you're not doing it because you're going to bring in Mario Cristobal from Eugene for anybody that's watched Oregon the last couple of weeks.
I think everyone knows listening to this podcast, I'm not the biggest Mario Cristobal guy. Certainly is a pretty good recruiter, specifically along the offensive line because he speaks big man language. But he certainly doesn't get the most out of his players, and I think we're seeing that now. It's very, very rare that you get to have an NFL caliber quarterback. He didn't really let Justin Herbert throw it enough because it wasn't his style of ball. And the defense, to this point, has regressed significantly. You got Thibodeau from Florida State after the whole Taggart incident. And there seems to be talent on that side of the ball. It's just really underachieving. So I'm not a big Mario Cristobal guy there. I certainly wouldn't hire him. But it's difficult. Right? It's difficult to hire college coaches. There wasn't anything that indicated Harbaugh not having success at Michigan. There really wasn't anything that indicated Tom Herman wouldn't have success at Texas. Like, it's really difficult to win in college football, and sometimes even these perfect situations don't always come to fruition. I'm stunned that John Harbaugh hasn't worked at Michigan, and not just from a national perspective. Like, I didn't expect them to go win national titles every year. But, and they're not even winning Big Ten championships. This is a team that's, having trouble getting above 500. So some of these things are shocking to me. It just kind of tells you that you might have the perfect hire and it still might not work out.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Jim and the trials and tribulations he's gone through in Ann Arbor, the biggest question mark you have there is how, for a guy that brought along Andrew Luck and resurrected a football program at San Diego before going to Stanford to get them there, how has he not been able to bring in one quarterback, to get a quarterback that fits his system as they look towards 2020 and beyond? Also, when all these programs are out there now trying to find head coaches, and we know it's a revolving door in this particular profession, it's not only got to be a good head coach, it's got to be an institutional fit. And while it's easy to say from the outside, hey, look, this guy won somewhere else, this guy's going to win with us, there's a lot to be said for a coach like a Matt Campbell who goes into Iowa State and can pretty much do things his way, doesn't have to deal with boosters or any of the other headaches and aims the same way that Tom Herman had to be a Texas guy, so to speak, or that Jim Harbaugh had to come in, conform to Michigan roots, and do things the right way while recruiting against a perennial power in Ohio State that resides in the same half of your division.
Yeah, I think the difference there would be expectation. Right? I love Matt Campbell, but there isn't that national expectation for Iowa State.
Yep, you're right.
And I think that's the difference. And Matt Campbell is probably going to be a Midwest guy, right? Some of these guys are like, hey, I'd rather make $3-4 million, be here for a lifetime than make $5, $6, $7, $8 million and have to run that rat race and potentially be out of a job in 3 or 4 years because we don't compete for a national title. And Matt Campbell's name was thrown around at Florida State. But my understanding is he doesn't necessarily want to be in the South, and a move for Matt Campbell would have to be somewhere into the Big Ten if he were to leave Iowa State. That's my understanding with him.
Well, a question along those lines, and this is kind of where a lot of high-profile college football coaches will get a look in the NFL, and I know we're way off the beaten path, but it'll all come full circle here eventually. Pat Fitzgerald's name has been attached to a potential head coaching vacancy with the Chicago Bears. We've watched Northwestern at great lengths, and while Fitzgerald has done what I think is an outstanding job building up a program that's one of the more difficult spots to recruit to. Gary Bennett showed it could be done, but Fitzgerald has kind of picked up that legacy. I grew up in the Chicagoland area. Northwestern was an afterthought from a football side because academics were always going to get in the way. He's coaching up what I would deem to be inferior talent in the Big Ten West and has this program positioned, or did, to win its second Big Ten West title in 3 years without the resources of a Wisconsin, of an Iowa, and some of the other programs that are out there. Do you think, knowing what these NFL teams are looking for and our thoughts on, hey, look, you have to go out and get an offensive-minded guy, would Fitzgerald be a college coach that you think could translate to the NFL if he moved right up the road along Lake Michigan to Soldier Field from Evanston?
I'm not really sure. That's a tough sell for me. And again, I've always talked about this, is taking programs at the college level from being poor to being average or above average. And I know what the record says, but if we were to look at like all the metrics and efficiency and power ratings, like certainly he's done a good job with Northwestern. And you luck into a transfer quarterback, or what does this season truly look like? But it's just so different taking a mediocre team and making them good versus getting a team in that mediocre range that expects to win. Like that's the big jump. And few can make that jump and do it successfully. And I think, going to the NFL is a little different altogether, right? Managing these personalities is going to be a little different than managing kids and playing that underdog card, so to speak, every week, with less talented players than it would be trying to motivate, guys making $100 million a year. And I think that's probably the difference. And I'm not saying I wouldn't hire him.
Yeah.
It certainly wouldn't be my first choice.
No, and I think for a Bears team that has to kind of resurrect their offense, you would want somebody that was an innovative offense in mind. I always wonder for coaches, and we know that Nick Saban's brief attempt in the NFL didn't work, Bobby Petrino, Steve Spurrier, that guys that have full control over their program and can dictate every aspect in the college level, those would be the guys that I would be reluctant to bring on in the NFL, because for the reasons you just mentioned there, you can't have full control over players that are making 9 figures. It's a little bit different when you're the celebrity and everybody has to bow down to you and you're a college football head coach. Slightly different in the NFL when you have to manage the egos and make sure that everybody gets their piece of the pie and work more as a CEO sometimes than anything else.
Yeah, without question. I mean, when you're looking at Northwestern, they get the most out of what they have because they're organized, they're disciplined, they're extremely smart. Pat Fitzgerald is a great motivator. And you can get into that room and play the underdog role every single week and effectively with the type of players that they have versus what they're going against. And that seems to be the distinguishing factor. And every couple years, they'll make a run when those guys reach their, junior, senior years. Other years, we do see them tend to struggle a little bit. So that's really the process there. It's like every 3 to 4 years, Pat Fitzgerald is kind of rebuilding the program to make that 1 year run. It just wouldn't be for me at the NFL level.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I'm curious to see if when we look at the Big Ten East, if Tom Allen is able to bring in a higher level of athlete. He seems to be a program builder. Very curious to see the trajectory of where the Hoosiers go from here, even if they can't go to the Big Ten championship this season.
I just think college football is great, and I get it. But at this level, there is or needs to be some realistic expectation involved with some of these teams. I mean, you even see Kentucky this week. Believe they fired their offensive coordinator, was it?
You know what? I haven't even looked to go through some of the coaching. Trying to figure out what players are eligible. The idea of trying to figure out which head coaches and coordinators will be there for next year is a little over my pay grade right now.
Yeah, I believe they fired their offensive coordinator this week, and it's like, well, I get it. It's not a good offense, but what did you really expect? I mean, what's the expectation at Kentucky? And you start to dig into Stoops' contract, and literally there's like bonuses and there's extensions revolving around 7 wins. So, I mean, if you talk to a Kentucky fan, though, and I think even us, we expected them to be a little bit better this year, but that's really what type of program they are. And so it's interesting to see some of the mindsets that fans have and, kind of correlating that to Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald. Like, he's good because the expectations truly aren't there. It's a completely different vibe at the NFL level. And, just being good enough and competitive isn't going to have you survive in that league more than 3 or 4 years.
Nope, you are spot on. I think when we talk all the time about under-promising and over-delivering, it's valuable advice to live by, not only when it comes to sports and sports betting, but also, for a lot of our listeners out there that are trying to figure things out. You can promise the sun, the moon, and the stars, but if you don't have the assets to deliver that, all you're going to do is disappoint people. Whereas if you come into a 3-win program and can perennially turn them from a 3-9 into a 7-5, that's a hell of a lot better than coming into a 10-win program and consistently going 8-4. Because you're not going to ever appease the fan base and keep them happy. And I think, all of that makes some sense and provides a roundabout segue into the first game that we had listed to try and break down.
We're here finally.
And that, of course, would be the Miami Hurricanes, a program that...
You did a good job finagling this into an hour podcast, I have to tell you.
I figure we do each of these games in 2 minutes. We're out of here in 27 minutes, and we're in pretty good shape. But the Hurricanes, a program that had their sights set on a rebound season, and Manny Diaz, in my opinion, has exceeded expectations, with Miami sitting at 8-1, playing host to a 7-3 North Carolina team. And when you look at this particular number, FanDuel a shade lower than the market. Miami a 2.5-point favorite. Total on the game 67.5 as they'll welcome in Mac Brown and company. The Canes enter off their biggest win of the season, a 48-0 drubbing of Duke. The defense held the Blue Devils to 177 yards, forced 5 turnovers en route to their first road shutout in 20 years. You begin to look at UNC's resume, Payne. There's a lot of question marks that are there, but one thing about North Carolina is they've done exceptionally well against Miami, covering 4 out of the last 5, and this is a Heels offense that's as dynamic as any in the country, highlighted by a tandem of backs that we know that can run the football, opening things up for Sam Howell. So as you begin to break down this football game, I think that probably becomes the most logical place to start. Miami defensively against North Carolina's offense. Who has the edge when the Heels have the football?
It's probably North Carolina. And if you were listening to Manny Diaz's presser this week, he kind of started tempering expectations for his defense.
Yeah, that didn't sound good, by the way.
No. And I'm sure after looking at the film, he knows what he's up against on this side of the ball. And Manny was like, flat out, UNC has the best receiver group we've faced all season and probably the best 1-2 punch at running back in the entire country. And when I started digging into this game, I kind of understand why he said what he said. And the first thing that stood out to me was, the poor offenses that Miami's faced this season, not named Clemson. And even in that game, there was some serious weather. There was another weather game scattered in there against Virginia, I believe, at home, which suppressed the offense as well. But the 8 other offenses Miami's faced this season, not named Clemson, have an average offensive EPA rank of 75th. And an offensive efficiency rank of 62nd overall. There's multiple games in there against backup quarterbacks as well. So, Miami didn't face Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett. They didn't face NC State with Devin Leary. Miami saw, Joey Yellen and Bailey Hockman. So you could easily argue, I think, that Trevor Lawrence and King, past those 2 guys, that probably Pickett and Leary are the best other quarterbacks in the ACC, and you don't even have to face those guys. If you look at some of the metrics, the Hurricanes right now, down to down, haven't been anything to write home to mom about. 71st in the country in rushing success rate allowed. It seems like Miami, if they aren't creating havoc and stuffing runs by being aggressive, sometimes overly aggressive, in shooting gaps, they give up some plays on the ground. That style of defensive front at times can have you losing your gap integrity, and it's something I think we've talked about earlier in the season. And sure enough, what you see on the field with your eyes kind of bears out in some of the metrics. Miami's 57th in explosive run defense. On paper, this is a mismatch. UNC's ground game, 8th in the country in rushing success rate offense, number 1 in explosive runs, and number 5 in EPA per rush. So you would think UNC is going to be able to run the ball a little bit here. When you talk about through the air, something that, Todd, we kind of talked about at the beginning of the season, because I had heard through the grapevine from some sources down here that Manny was a little concerned with the secondary and their ability to cover, specifically the corners. And you can tell he hasn't been aggressive with his coverages as much this season as in years past. So with Manny playing guys back a little bit more, and the poor quarterbacks that they've faced, Miami hasn't really done a good job to this point, down to down, 44th in passing success rate defense allowed. Now, they've done a good job preventing explosive plays because they are playing back a little bit more, 11th in the country in explosive pass defense. And, you look at Sam Howell, you look at how UNC's offense is built a little bit. They do like to hunt the big play, but that really isn't Miami's weakness. So I think it's important that, he's got to be a little bit more efficient down to down. You also have to make note of this. Al Blades Jr. is out for Miami's secondary. He's played the second most snaps for the Hurricanes this season, and so I think that's a pretty big loss as well. So, the only way in my mind that UNC contains, or is contained rather, by Miami's defense, and I think that's probably the right word because I don't think you're going to stop UNC completely, but you have to contain them by getting pressure. North Carolina's offensive line isn't the best in pass protection from what I've seen. 102nd in the country in sack rate allowed. Sam Howell's been pressured on over 33% of his dropbacks, and this is a kid that releases it pretty quick, 2.5 seconds on average. So Howell isn't like hanging on to the ball forever and taking sacks, and that's why these numbers are a little bloated. That's not the case. So the key here is Miami's got to stop the run so you can get Sam Howell in these known passing situations, then take advantage of an area where Miami has an edge over North Carolina's offense. And that's potentially getting pressure in known passing situations. That's really the only edge Miami's defense has. You're looking at a guy like Quincy Roche, and he is an absolute game wrecker, so you need to put him in situations where he can wreck the game. Last week, 38% pressure rate all by himself against it. So that's the key on this side of the ball.
Yeah, and the one thing you mentioned it, in the one common denominator in North Carolina's losses this season, well, they've given up 15 sacks in that trio of games. So it speaks to that, hey, look, behind down and distance, a team that's actually got a lot more dynamic ground game than they were given credit for coming into the season, with a pair of backs with 1,800 plus rushing yards and 23 touchdowns. Ground and pound is the mentality, making life a little bit easier for Sam Howell. But at the same time, Payne, let's not sugarcoat it. North Carolina defensively is far from elite. Lawrence Taylor isn't walking through that door in Chapel Hill anytime soon. And when you look at this Miami offense, D'Eriq King has really started a hum of late. He's thrown 10 touchdown passes over his last 4 games compared to 0 interceptions, 240 plus passing yards in those games. And he's shown obviously the dual threat ability he has to use his legs only when needed. Cameron Harris, relatively fresh, you would expect, only carried it 15 times in the win last weekend against North Carolina. But if you're the Heels and you're trying to prepare a defensive game plan, how do you go about at least trying to slow down the Hurricanes, having optimism that your offense is obviously going to get points in their own right?
Yeah, I think you have to hope and pray a little bit. And I do think it was really important that Miami had a tune-up game against Duke last week. That was really needed because they hadn't played in 21 days, and you almost wonder if that game isn't able to be played, if Miami's walking into a little bit of a buzzsaw, against UNC as they're trying to get acclimated to game speed after what would have been a month off. So that was a vital game against Duke. You also saw the offense seem to have some confidence. They hummed last week, and it was very balanced. It was efficient on the ground and through the air. What will be interesting to me and again, I haven't watched all of these games. I haven't watched Miami play every week. I haven't watched North Carolina play every week. But the games that I have, my eyes told me the same thing that some of the metrics do. And the largest weakness of both Miami's offense and North Carolina's defenses are the same. Miami really hasn't to this point shown an ability to consistently run when it's not King using his legs. And North Carolina hasn't really been, stopping anybody in the trenches. They've been pretty much pushed around in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. They've given up chunks of yards on the ground. And if you look at some of these metrics, Miami's offensive line, 97th in line yards. So they're not creating a ton of room for the running backs. But North Carolina's defense, 105th in line yards. So again, opposing O-lines are really getting good push against that Tar Heels defensive front. Miami's offense, outside the top 80 in rushing success rate. North Carolina's defense, 100th in the country in EPA per rush allowed. So whichever of the units can turn this weakness into, a make-believe strength for 60 minutes, that I think probably goes a real long way here. We know D'Eriq King right now starting to eye the NFL a little bit more than I think anticipated early on in the season because he's having a pretty good year, especially throwing the ball with Lashley. I think these last few games are huge for his stock. King's decision, honestly, probably impacts where Mackenzie Milton ends up transferring to, so something to watch for there that's a little bit unrelated. North Carolina's strength to me is is in the secondary defensively. Top 40 passing success rate allowed, explosive passing and EPA per pass, all top 40. North Carolina's defense does a good job getting pressure in known passing situations. They've done a really good job getting the quarterback down when they're faced with these second and third and long situations. 17th in the country sacking quarterbacks and almost 12% of passes on passing down. So that's pretty impressive to me there. So again, they're not big and physical, but they're a little bit faster and athletic. So if they can stop the run, and again, get De'Aaron King in some situations where, he's has to pass on third and long. That's typically not his game. I know he does a nice job as well, getting the ball out quickly, 2.4 seconds to release it. But I think, as crazy as it's going to sound, when you look at De'Aaron King, the key to this one is rushing the ball again. And I know it sounds antiquated in 2020, but if you can get King into second and long, into third and long, that's not really where he wants to be. And that's where UNC's defense is best, stopping the pass and getting after the quarterback. So to me, if Miami's able to run the ball, they're going to negate anything that UNC can really do, and they're going to hang some points here. And so that's the key to me. And you even look at De'Aaron King, for as mobile as he is, he hasn't been the best dealing with pressure. 80 passer rating, 55% adjusted completion percentage, middle of the pack in a lot of those categories under heat. So that's got to be the key. Whoever stops the run on this side of the ball effectively sets themselves up in the best positions to move the ball through there, in my mind. So that'll be the key here. I don't think either of those units are very good along the offensive and defensive line in terms of trench play outside of UNC being able to get a little pressure on the quarterback. And the only chance they have of doing that is to get King in these second and third and long situations. Should
be interesting to see which team can assert itself as leader of the pack in terms of the ACC's second tier, since both programs clearly a cut below Clemson and Notre Dame. From the ACC, Payne, though, we head out to the West Coast, where two familiar rivals will renew acquaintances, that, of course, being USC and UCLA, who will play for the Victory Bell. And when you look at this number here, USC is a 3-point road favorite for their trip to the Rose Bowl, though money is coming in on the Bruins. Total on this game sits at 6.
As we speak.
Yep, as we speak. Total on this game sits 62 at FanDuel. And when you look at USC, they've won 16 out of the last 21 meetings between these two teams. If USC were to win on Saturday, it would mark the first time that they were 5-0 in a season in 14 years. Pretty interesting to think about, knowing the perennial power that we perceive USC to be. But when you look at UCLA, clearly this is a program that's trending in the right direction. There were a lot of questions about Chip Kelly and what we were going to see from the Bruins, and I think a lot of that was on full display week one when they went out there and laid an egg against Colorado. That loss doesn't look quite so bad, as the Buffaloes are still undefeated on the campaign. Dorian Thompson-Robinson returned to action last week, leads UCLA to a big win over Arizona State, despite the Bruins' best efforts to spit the bit throughout the entire second half. USC, meanwhile, they play on Sunday, a bit of a short week. 5 touchdown passes from Keaton Slovis in the win against Wazoo. And your boy Graham Harrell, some pretty scathing criticism that he took at the hands from USC media about their inability to run the ball. His response, I think when the quarterback goes 17 to 17 and a half and throws 5 touchdowns, you're doing some things well. So that's our level of concern. Well, Graham, you may have to be a little bit more balanced this weekend. But when you look at USC on the offensive side, do you see them having success against a resurgent UCLA defense?
I have no idea what USC is. This feels like a program right now that's kind of being held together by the strongest duct tape possible. The recruiting has not been great. Your head coach, to me, would have been a lame duck if you weren't just compiling wins against poor teams. Offensively, the entire thing is on Keaton Slovis and Graham Harrell, quarterback and former quarterback. And it's no surprise that, their pass game's leading the charge. You kind of hit on this. They can't spell run. And I get the media is asking those questions, but Graham Harrell's right. This is a pass-first offense. It's always going to be when you bring in a Graham Harrell as your OC. And when you have Keaton Slovis, who's an NFL talent, you should be using him to pass, and you have a slew of nice receivers. And, I don't know what people expect. I really don't. Like, we joke all the time, Todd, about the Pac-12 being a little softer, but there is truth behind it. There's no debating that. I mean, you look at USC right now, 103rd in the country in line yards, 0 push up front. USC is allowing 22% of their run plays to be stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage. That's 105th in the nation. And so, without that push up front, you can see why USC's 88th in rushing success rate, 102nd in explosive runs. You add it all up, you have a Trojans ground game that's 113th in EPA per rush. Only 127 teams played football. So it's not good from that perspective. The funny part about this, though, is similar to the UNC matchup defensively against Miami's offense, is the other California team is soft in one specific spot too, and that's stopping the run. Literally, you look at USC's offense and UCLA's defense on a matchup page side by side, and they look pretty much identical. And it's not shocking to me. But you're looking at the Bruins' run defense right now, 103rd in defensive line yards, 102nd in stuff rate. Through 5 games, UCLA's defense 115th in the country in rushing success rate. So who wins that battle of the midgets, I guess, is what's going to, hopefully, I should say not hopefully, but will impact this side. So bad on bad rushing. And, when you look at the game through the air and some of the passing stuff, when USC does drop back to pass, this is probably good on good. That seems to be the one area where UCLA's defense has been improved. It's their secondary. So, doing some reading this week, a lot of praise has been given to Brian Norwood right now, UCLA's defensive backs coach, whether it's some players or even Chip Kelly. They've talked about his focus on teaching technique. Now, that's really helped. Basically, it's the same players that were getting torched in Paul Rhodes' defense last year at UCLA. So when I look at UCLA, a little bit better against the pass through 5 games, top 40 in both passing success rate allowed, explosive pass defense, 26th in EPA per pass allowed. However, I kind of want to say this and put an asterisk by it. I'm not sure UCLA's pass defense has improved as much as we think. On paper it has. But, you're looking at the 5 games so far. The average passing EPA rank of UCLA's opponents, 83rd in the country. UCLA's literally played one offense inside the top 78 in passing EPA. They really haven't played anybody that can pass the ball. So, to me, Keaton Slovis, St. Brown, they've been good. They've leading the charge, obviously, for USC's offense, which isn't surprising. Drake London's been good. Tyler Vaughn's is having a good season as well. USC is certainly a pass-first offense, top 35 in passing success rate and EPA per pass. So, to me, this is just tough. Like, having watched far too much Pac-12 After Dark this season, this is a bad conference.
I mean, you're normally in bed before the Pac-12 games even kick off at 10:30 Eastern time.
Well, rather than counting sheep, I just pop on the game here to the Pac-12, and it typically puts me right to sleep. I go to sleep like a baby. So, it does feel like there's a lot of variance week to week in this conference right now. And I think we're seeing that not just in the metrics, not just like with some of the recruiting stuff and where these programs are at, but it's really showing itself on the field as well. We're not quite sure what's what. A lot of drastic, performances week to week here.
Well, one thing to go even further, you talk about UCLA, and they have praised the change in scheme amongst as much as anything else, going to a 4-2-5, which is designed, obviously, to play to your defensive back strengths. You look at UCLA's schedule that you mentioned. Week 1, Colorado, level playing field. They gave up, 500-plus yards against the Buffaloes. They get California on that quirky Sunday game. Cal hadn't had practices with their 11-on-11 whatsoever. So that game immediately has an asterisk. You play Oregon. Oregon had full preparation, so to speak. UCLA, to their credit, went in there with a backup quarterback, but you do give up 330-plus yards through the air. Arizona, well, they lose their starting quarterback the first play of the game. Will Plummer comes in and obviously can't do a whole heck of a lot. And then last weekend, yes, it's a win for UCLA, and it's an outright win as a 3-point underdog, but Arizona State hadn't played a game in nearly a month. So everything is kind of aligned for UCLA's defense to kind of get right in that particular regard. Now, on the other side of the ball, though, USC, Payne, there may not be a team in the Pac-12 that's benefited more from starting field position over the last 2 weeks than the Trojans, whose average starting field position is better than their own 40-yard line in wins against Utah and Washington State. USC's defense doesn't wow me by any stretch of the imagination, and you have to think that UCLA is going to have some success as DTR has one full game under his belt and should be able to run and throw against this Trojans' undermanned defensive front.
Yeah, aside from the defense of UCLA that looks semi-improved, but we're not quite sure, especially with all the things we've just outlined there, why we're seeing money come in on UCLA so far, and that is what's happening. This is a game that opened 3.5. We're now at like 2.9, and we're trending below that key number. It's because of the ground game and possibly being able to control and dictate pace and tempo a little bit more because they can run the ball. UCLA's offensive line has done a really good job creating some push in the ground game, 19th in the country in standard down line yards. You mentioned DTR. He's mobile, right? He creates that added man advantage in the box and running plays, which makes some things really difficult for defenses. 47% of UCLA's run plays have graded successful. Now, they haven't had, a lot of pop in the ground game. They're not hitting these explosive runs to the rate that we kind of expected, but where USC has been most vulnerable defensively is on the ground. And I think this has been a constant for a few years now. And I remember us talking about it last season about how poor the Trojans defense was with their gap integrity and setting the edge. Nothing has changed this season in the games that I've watched. And USC right now, 65th in the country in rushing success rate allowed, 121st in explosive run defense. Okay. Now I know USC doesn't recruit to the level they once did, but you have athletes, and 121 in explosive run defense signals a lot of stuff going on that shouldn't be happening. Now you look at USC, they do a decent job of creating havoc, 32nd there, decent job stuffing runs, 30th. But if they aren't making plays at or behind the line of scrimmage, because USC clearly isn't disciplined and sound along the defensive line, they give up gashers. So that'll be something to look for here. The other key is, DTR can't make a mistake through the air. We know he's not the most accurate quarterback. UCLA is just okay throwing at 58th in the country in passing success rate. You do see Chip Kelly occasionally like to take that deep shot, which is why UCLA is 33rd in explosive pass offense. But the one very good thing about USC's defense is the secondary. Far and away the best part. 17th in EPA per pass allowed. They haven't been beaten deep at all. 6th in explosive pass defense. So aside from the ground game, when UCLA does go to throw it, being efficient in that short to intermediate route and DTR being accurate is important. USC can also get some pressure defensively in some known passing situations, and DTR hasn't been the best throwing under pressure. 50 passer rating, adjusted completion percentage of 50. So again, it feels like we're talking 1920 football here, but just looking at these matchups on paper, if UCLA can run the ball, they're going to have success on offense because, one, running efficiently is a positive here, and it's also going to keep USC's offense on the sideline, but it's also not going to put DTR in some poor situations where throughout his career he's been known to make a mistake or two in some key games. So I think that's the key here is if you're USC, you got to force DTR into 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8, 3rd and 6 plus, because that's where your advantage lies defensively in the secondary and being able to get a little bit of pressure. If DTR's in 3rd and short and 2nd and medium, UCLA is going to hang some points here.
Interesting game, knowing that USC controls its own destiny for the Pac-12 South. Obviously, Utah knocking off Colorado on Friday night would take some of the pressure off the Trojans. Who they're going to play in the potential Pac-12 championship should they get there remains anybody's best guess. I made a report from Bruce Feldman a little while ago that Washington and Oregon very much have their game in jeopardy on Saturday. That is the COVID world we live in. I don't even know if I looked at the Pac-12 North standings who ultimately would emerge from that pile of nonsense to try and get into a league championship, but we'll figure that out based on how things go. What we do know in the Big 12, Payne, is what teams will be playing for the conference championship a week from Saturday in Arlington. And it'll, of course, be the Oklahoma Sooners matched up against the team they'd love to get revenge against in the form of the Iowa State Cyclones. But before Oklahoma gets there, they have to go into Morgantown as 2-touchdown favorites. Total on the game, 56.5 at FanDuel, to take on the West Virginia Mountaineers. This game, of course, rescheduled from what should have been played Thanksgiving week. Shane Beamer of the Oklahoma coaching staff said he will stay on at Oklahoma through the conference championship after taking the head coaching job at South Carolina. When you look at Oklahoma, they've dominated.
Thank God I don't know how Lincoln Riley and Grinch would have survived.
They've dominated West Virginia, going 5-0-1 against the spread the last 6 meeting. The total in all 6 of those games has gone flying over, and that does include a game that had an over-under of 86, where the two teams combined for more than 100 points. But West Virginia this season, they've been a different animal at home, and they have been over their last 13 home games where they've covered it better than a 70% clip. You look at the Mountaineers, Payne, and everyone that's coming to Morgantown has struggled to move the football. West Virginia was absolutely embarrassed last weekend against Iowa State, a game that I think serves as an outlier for their season-long defensive metrics, but the same could be said for the Oklahoma Sooners, who didn't do a whole heck of a lot in their pretty pedestrian effort and win in non-cover against Baylor. Lincoln Riley ripped his offense, Neil Brown ripped his defense. Which team returns to some level of normalcy this weekend when these two teams will do battle?
Let's start with the place that would have been really fun to talk about. And, let me be candid here. I think nothing I say after this matters. If West Virginia's defense plays like it did last week, where, I'm watching this game in the first half and they're just getting blown off the ball. I mean, Iowa State bullied West Virginia's defense, something we haven't seen all season. West Virginia had no answers defensively. It was embarrassing, the effort the Mountaineers played with. And the question, I think, coming into that game, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong here, was Iowa State were like, hey, would these guys be motivated after making the Big 12 championship game?
They were.
And there was real professional money on West Virginia last week.
Yep.
And it was a flat-out no-show. So I don't know what happened. If West Virginia plays to their standard defensively, this is the awesome part of this matchup. And you have Lincoln Riley Sooners offense against, what we thought was a really good West Virginia defense. And you think this cat and mouse game that could potentially be played is like, hey, this is appointment television, especially this season for college football. So to even think about staying within this number and being competitive, West Virginia's defense has to show up. Now, aside from last week, West Virginia's defense was pushing towards being elite this season. I know there's some question marks about competition. But prior to last week against Iowa State, West Virginia was number 2 in passing success rate defense, 16th in explosive pass defense, and 7th in EPA pass defense. Now, after that game against Iowa State, where they get absolutely shredded, you're looking at a West Virginia defense that suddenly doesn't look as good. 11th in passing success rate, 45th in explosive passing, and 15th in EPA pass defense. So you just start to wonder if West Virginia's defense had been feasting on quarterbacks that really didn't have a future at the next level, and suddenly the first time they face an NFL caliber quarterback in Brock Purdy, they get shredded, or if it's just, a bunch of college kids having a brain fart for a 60-minute sample, and, you're not quite sure. I think we're going to find out, obviously, against another NFL caliber quarterback in Spencer Rattler, if West Virginia's defense is truly good. Aside from the ground game, play action and misdirection hurt West Virginia's defense last week, and we saw with Lincoln Riley, what he did with another aggressive defense in Oklahoma State, right? With misdirection, the first few drives in the Bedlam game, it was something that he used almost every snap with some pre-snap motion and some misdirection and some throwbacks and some reverses. If you're looking at the film from last week, that seemed to be what worked against West Virginia, along with just, plowing it right down their ass. The other thing that's really interesting to think about with Oklahoma's offense is they have been trending a little bit better, sans last week, with the run offense. With Stevenson back, it also allows Pledger to be that change of pace runner. This is truly a good-on-good matchup if you just look at the metrics. So, for me, the bigger questions before we get to the other side of the ball is like, these teams have played once since the last time we broke this game down. And I think if you're a loyal listener, you'll remember it was going into, I believe, Thanksgiving week before it got canceled. The line was 11. Now it's 14. So we've had a 3-point move off of 60 minutes of football to a key number here. And I'm asking this, Todd, because this feels like West Virginia Super Bowl. Right?
100%.
Their last game of the season. It's on Senior Day. Oklahoma isn't making the college football playoff. They have the Big 12 championship next week. Now all of a sudden you have this, another 3 points in value here, or I should say 3 points difference from when they were going to meet a couple weeks back. We kind of know this, and you kind of introduced this to me via text, is that like Lincoln Riley runs a little bit of a looser ship. Do we see a fully motivated Oklahoma team here?
I think it's a great question. Oklahoma should be healthier than they've been. We know that they dealt with a COVID outbreak as early as the Oklahoma State game. It didn't impact them then. There was talk about who was or wasn't going to be available in their game against Baylor. We know that Bob Stoops had to step in as a celebrity assistant coach, given some of the deficiency there. But you do want...
like one of those rock and jock basketball games.
you know, 40-point peach basket or whatever it is, 30-point peach basket for the monster hoop. But you try and figure out what Oklahoma does have to do here. There's no doubt that Lincoln Riley would want to work out some of the kinks that were apparent against Baylor and Dave Aranda's team last week going into the conference championship, because it won't be easy trying to exact a measure of revenge against Iowa State. But I don't think you also want to empty the entire playbook if you're Oklahoma. The idea of sneaking into the college football playoff, that's not going to happen. So it's not like you need to go out there and get style points. But Neil Brown's comments and Lincoln Riley's, both very telling in all of it. I mean, Neil Brown, we just struggled to block them in both the passing and the run game. You don't say, Neil. You were completely overwhelmed at every turn. And he continues to go on. And when a coach says this, Payne, we just didn't look like the same team. Our alignment and communication was poor. We had more missed tackles on the first drive than we had in games for all season long. A lot of that was poor technique. It was poor coaching. We didn't do a very good job of setting the edge. I mean, you have to think West Virginia is going to be better this week, knowing that this is probably a bigger game against Oklahoma than any potential bowl matchup would be 2 or 3 weeks down the road.
You sure hope, because if we see the effort they gave last week, this is going to get ugly. But we hadn't seen that from them defensively all season. I was stunned. And there was some really sharp money under both first half and full on that game last week. I believe, well, I know the first half under got there. The full game, did that sneak over with that Breece Hall late touchdown? Or did
by
that
the
fall right on the
slimmest
number?
of margins, it closed 48.5. It gets to 48. So anyone that had an under ticket there should thank Neil Brown, because trailing 42-3, rather than going for it on fourth down from the 17-yard line, elects to kick a field goal, cutting the margin from 42-3 to 42-6.
That's what I thought. I thought the second half was pretty close.
Yeah, second half went over, first half went
entire...
over. First half went under, second half went over, full game under by the slimmest of margins.
Gotcha. I watched the entire first half, and I was just shocked. I was like, I have not seen this before. Iowa State is literally just pounding these guys into the ground. You're watching, because a lot of times I just don't watch the ball. I just watch what's going on with the lines. And West Virginia's defensive line is getting moved back like 3, 4, 5 yards. It was wild to see, because I've watched... shouldn't be proud to say this, but I've watched a lot of West Virginia football this season, and I just hadn't seen that. So Neil Brown's comments are pretty telling. It was a step up in class last week in terms of the quarterbacks that they have been accustomed to playing. It's an even further step up this week against Oklahoma's offense if they care to be there. But I do think we see a little bit more of a re-energized focus and effort on that side of the ball defensively.
Yeah, this total up a shade as well from where it would have been on Thanksgiving. 54.5, 55, more or less the consensus before it was pulled off the board. Now you're seeing this up to 57, and you mentioned the caliber of competition that they face. There's no doubt when you look at West Virginia's home games so far this season, it has been anything but a murderer's row. Now, to their credit, they've acquitted themselves quite nicely and held all of those offenses in check, from TCU to Kansas, to, of course, Kansas State as well. So interesting game for a variety of reasons, sometimes not just X's and O's that'll go into a game this late in the season, but some of those other intangibles that you try and ultimately quantify. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And for anybody out there right now who's not playing with the FanDuel Sportsbook, I'm not quite sure why. You can always add a little excitement to your sports watching experience by betting all of the action at FanDuel Sportsbook. There's a reason why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Their app is simple to use, great odds, different betting betting markets, plenty of promos, bonuses, what have you, especially for our Bet the Board listeners. Go to FanDuel Sportsbook, sign up, use the promo code BetTheBoard. Specific offers just for our audience that all of you guys can take advantage of. Restrictions, of course, do apply. The reason I give you all of that is because we do still have one final thing to discuss before we get out of Dodge for college football week 15. And Payne, that is figuring out where we're going to go with our final best bet of the college football regular season.
Did you not want to talk about West Virginia's offense against Oklahoma's defense? I mean, you filibustered at the top for about 20 minutes, and now the important stuff, you just, no need to discuss it.
I did do a good job of filibustering. I was pretty proud of myself for that, so I'm going to pat myself on the back. I didn't want to hear you take...
I mean, no one wants to hear you make a case for Ohio State being good.
No one wants to hear you make a case for Jarret Doege having a noodle for an arm and embarrass the poor kid on this podcast.
That's what it will come down to.
I mean,
Jarret Doege being able to efficiently pass it in the short to intermediate areas. That's
Letty Brown can find some success running the football more so than he found last weekend in Ames against the Clones front?
Very tough. The offensive line just isn't that good, right? Bad job creating running lanes and moving people in the trenches. 115th in the country in line yards. 19% of West Virginia's run plays have been stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage. I think the important thing is him being able to hit a gasher or two. That's the entire key to West Virginia's ground game, is maybe hitting an explosive run. Now, Alex Grinch's defense is trending in the right direction, has been for a while now, but the one area where they're weakest, relatively speaking, is they have given up a big run or two this season. So it's really on Jarret Doege to create some plays through the pass game in that short to intermediate route, in that short to intermediate area, rather. And that'll be the key. If not, Oklahoma's probably going to have some short fields on offense.
Kevin White have any eligibility left to help out that West Virginia receiving corps since he hasn't really done much at the NFL level?
I was going to say he might. I have not seen.
Is he even on an NFL roster these days?
At the NFL level, man, I don't know what happened to him.
Dude,
and he had the size.
Dude was a stud.
I have no idea what happened to Kevin White.
Unfortunately,
White.
like most players that get drafted by the Chicago Bears on the offensive side of the ball, it's not exactly a place where you can go thrive and flourish as a skill position talent.
Someone made a video, the tragic story of Kevin White. So did something happen to him?
I'm going to feel real bad then if something happened to him.
Yeah. I have no idea.
I mean, tragic, hopefully, only being that he was drafted by the Bears, 7th overall. I hope nothing more serious.
There you go.
So
okay.
All right.
Let's focus
By the way,
in here a little bit.
Thanks. It was very important for you to talk about West Virginia's offense and Oklahoma's defense. We're all smarter for having heard that breakdown.
Well, really, I didn't get a chance to break down. I was just kind of trying to get out of Dodge here.
I see what you did there, Doege Dodge. I gotcha.
Here we go. Best bet, and this is one that we both like, has moved a little bit on us. But, there's only a few threes out there. Most of this was plus 2.5, plus 1.5. I think we're okay still taking this game at pick. I like 3.85 Wisconsin. What do you say?
I'm not going to disagree with you. I think, for as much as we've talked about the Badgers, even in our own power numbers being slightly overrated, a team that was limited as far as offensive skill position talent, this is a game, in my opinion, where they can punch within their own weight class. And what do I mean when I say that? It's a team, or at least teams, that are more or less mirror images of one another. They both want to run the football. They both want to lean on young quarterbacks to throw off a play action when it's available. And they're not going to give up a whole lot of big plays on the other side of the ball. But I look at Wisconsin, Payne, and while offensively the numbers are pretty ugly, they score 7 against Northwestern in a 17-7 loss, and 6 last week against Indiana, 14-6. They dominated the stat sheet in both of those games. And a metric we don't talk about a ton, yards per point. College football average, it's about 15 yards per point, safe to say, plus or minus?
Yeah, I think it's like roughly 14. But yeah, you're
Wisconsin
right there.
Over 54 yards per point is what it's taken for them to put points on the board, and they said red zone execution was the biggest thing that they were going to work on. They held Jack Tuttle in check, 217 yards of total offense for the Hoosiers, despite Indiana winning that game outright. And I feel eventually regression shows up, and when you look at Iowa on the other side, Tyler Goodson is probably one of the more underrated running backs in the Big Ten, but the reality of it is he's not going to find running lanes against this Wisconsin defensive front, and I just haven't seen enough from Stephen Petrus to lead me to believe that if Wisconsin can make them one-dimensional, he's able to throw over the top. I think Wisconsin's played a much tougher schedule the last couple of weeks than Iowa, and it feels like the perfect buy low opportunity, knowing that Wisconsin laid 7 2 weeks ago at Northwestern, and yet Iowa against Wisconsin and Iowa against Northwestern is opening right around the same territory in that pick -1 range.
Certainly value within the number. Others that are sophisticated felt the same way. To your point, Wisconsin still, despite a couple losses, number 1 in the country in rushing success rate defense, number 1 in the country in preventing explosive runs as well. So they've been very good handling the ground game. Negate Goodson. We have a real good shot here. There's value in the number. This is a rivalry game, as you kind of mentioned, so we don't have, in my mind, listening to and reading all the quotes this week, a real flat spot here for Wisconsin. And that's the difficult part of navigating this season, right? It's not just the lack of games that are happening, right? We have less to pick from and choose from, and that is ultimately your advantage as a bettor. And then navigating through some of the potential COVID issues that could happen even in the games you play. Now we're wondering which team is going to show up, which isn't, and we're kind of playing that balancing act here. But I do think Wisconsin is certainly going to be motivated for this one, knowing it is a rivalry game. So the value in the number here is just too much. The matchup is very good for Wisconsin. So, yeah, let's go with 3-8-5 Wisconsin Badgers at a pick 'em. My feeling is, I don't want to overstep here, but just based upon our numbers, if you told me Wisconsin closed a 3-point favorite, would not be shocking.
Wisconsin, to their credit, has really owned this rivalry, winning 7 out of the last 8. They haven't been intimidated going into a Pat Kinnick Stadium in the past to try and compete for the Heartland Trophy. And as terrible as it is to say, Payne, Wisconsin dealt with a major COVID outbreak earlier. I don't think, knock on wood, we're running into the risk we've seen where Wisconsin is going to have another massive COVID outbreak going into kickoff of this game. At least we would hope. So Wisconsin Badgers at a pick'em. Shop around for those desert dwellers out there. There should be a +1
desert dwellers
available for the taking. But pick'em will be the official grading point as we delve into Big Ten football Saturday afternoon from Kinnick Stadium. Anything else, Payne, you'd like to disclose, share with our loyal listeners? I know they're anxiously awaiting the breakdown of the Philadelphia Eagles making the decision to go to Jalen Hurts as their starting quarterback tomorrow on the NFL podcast.
I don't know anything about that.
On that note, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Go to FanDuel Sportsbook, download the app, use the promo code Bet the Board. Take advantage of all the exclusive offers readily available for you. Restrictions do apply, but as we always say in this business, give yourself plenty of outs. It's going to help your long-term winning percentage. And with a Wisconsin ticket in hand come Saturday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.